I'm joined with Michelle Hamilton, registered psychologist for Beyond Balanced here in Lloydminster. Always a pleasure to have you on, Michelle. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you again.
We have an interesting topic we want to kind of jump into today, and that is one of compassion fatigue. So before we even get into it, can you kind of explain the definition of what that even really means to start off with?
Okay, well, compassion fatigue is a concept that's been developed to help explain, the range and the variety of negative effects that can result from a person's continual caregiving or, it might be a professional or a personal role of being continually focused on other people's pain, stress, and trauma, and the effect that can have on the caregiver or the helping professional.
Yeah, and so with that kind of fatigue, does it look different when a person has that? Does it kind of come across as a different feeling than just feeling tired? Like what kind of comes along? What are, I guess you would say, I don't know if you call them symptoms, but what would you kind of notice if you had those that feeling?
Yeah, and I do think we could think of them as symptoms, for some people, especially thinking in terms of health professionals, for example, counselors, psychologists, social workers, medical people, nurses, doctors, they may experience a variety of symptoms that might in fact be kind of similar to those we'd see in post-traumatic stress. It's possibly going to show up in ways in terms of anxiety symptoms, having difficulty not thinking about patients, clients' problems outside of work time, perhaps sleep disturbances. Sometimes we're experiencing hyperarousal in that sense of the body being overactivated and easily triggered into a state of stress. Obsession or difficulty not being over-focused on other people and their needs.
Yeah, so with that kind of that stress and something that, what is something that you can kind of maybe, I guess, prevent it to start? And then if you do have, we'll start with prevention. How do you kind of make sure that you do take care of yourself in those steps to make sure that it doesn't get to that point where you experience that fatigue?
Right. Well, I think if you're in a position of being a caregiver in all kinds of ways, I think it's especially important to make sure you've got really good boundaries set up so that, for one thing, you know your limits, and whether it be time boundaries or almost like the idea of an emotional boundary, that you're really conscious about not taking on more than you can give.
Right.
And so boundaries is one really important thing, and self-care, in all sorts of ways, in terms of making sure that we recognize the risk involved in doing this kind of work, that we're really careful about protecting our our own mental, emotional, spiritual, psychological health, by staying connected with other people, by giving ourselves enough time for, physical exercise, maybe mindfulness, meditation practices and things like that, and maybe even seeking out the help of a therapist.
Right, yeah, for sure. And so I guess that kind of follows into when you do get that compassion fatigue. So I guess the steps, if you have recognized that that's something that you now have, are the steps to kind of rebuild back into being in a healthy state would be just making sure that you do those things and acknowledge that that's what you need.
It might be a matter of really honing in on your self-care practices, as I've just said, and improving it or increasing your boundaries, limiting your time. Some people do need to change the focus of their work. A greater variety of exposure to other kinds of people and situations can be really helpful. Sometimes a change is required, and I do think sometimes people really do find themselves affected to the point that they might need therapy and need to dig a little bit deeper into treating the effect of the trauma that can come through this vicarious way. Vicarious trauma is a term that's used in a very close way to compassion fatigue.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for digging into that with me today.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. If you want more knowledge on compassion fatigue, feel free to contact Michelle at Beyond Balance, and thank you so much for coming in today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.